Well, after another rough week, the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, would no doubt like some good news. But today's Council of Australian Governments meeting hasn't delivered it. Predictably, Australia's political leaders split along party lines when it came to making the tough decisions on a scheme to help people with disabilities. In a moment, the Prime Minister will join me in the studio to discuss the government's woes, from leadership to the cost of living. But first, Heather Ewart reports on what today's limited COAG progress means for some of the nation's most disadvantaged citizens.
What do you want?
It's that time-honoured ritual when state premiers come to Canberra pleading they're short of money.
Morning, Premier.
In this case, the big sticking point was who pays what share of the federal government's much-anticipated National Disability Insurance Scheme, scheduled to start next July.
What I'm saying is right now we simply are not in a position to provide money.
The federal government strategy is to say, no, the states have to fund it. What's the point of coming if that's going to be the continuing attitude?
I think there's a lot of work to be done yet.
We want to make it happen. I want to make it happen.
But we also expect the Commonwealth to shoulder the lion's share of that additional expenditure.
So they all want it, they just don't want to pay for it, or at least not too much of it. The federal government's plan today was to agree on 4 launch sites before the scheme kicks off, and all the states and territories were vying to be the chosen ones. But they were haggling over what they could contribute.
We've stumped up $20 million.
Well, we're putting almost $200 million on the table as our contribution.
We just don't have the funds at the moment. We want to help.
As the COAG meeting got down to business, the federal government was holding firm. It had $1 billion set aside in its budget to start the scheme that it claimed would cover 78% of the cost of the launch, and the states were expected to make up the rest. For those who thought the scheme was a done deal, the battle over funding was infuriating.
I just get very cross and very frustrated because I think that it is something that should have been sorted out a long time ago.
URSULA NESCI has a 19-year-old disabled daughter who needs constant care.
I care for Julia 24/7 pretty much. I've got some carers who help for a few hours a week.
For this Melbourne family, a National Disability Insurance Scheme is viewed as a godsend that would get rid of state red tape and waiting lists.
It would mean that I could plan for Julia's future and that I wouldn't have to go to bed at night, waking up in the middle of the night, worrying about what's going to happen if one day I can't take care of her anymore.
This scheme will provide a reasonable and necessary level of support to people with a disability who at the moment have no entitlements whatsoever.
John Walsh was one of the architects of the Productivity Commission report recommending the scheme. The launch sites that were being hammered out at COAG he sees as crucial to iron out infrastructure and establish the cost of the entire scheme.
It would be a disaster for people with a disability if these turn into a series of trials that last for 4 years and nothing happens after that.
By late this afternoon, his fears were looking well-founded when the Prime Minister and state and territory leaders emerged with no consensus and the look of having been through a big bun fight.
I am disappointed that we haven't been able to reach agreement over what are comparatively, for governments in this country, relatively small sums. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is starting. It's starting in 3 places around the country, and I think that's great news.
No, it's not. After several hours of talks, the only agreement the federal government could get was for its Labor counterparts in South Australia, Tasmania and the ACT to take on launch sites. It couldn't even pull off a 4th trial site. The most populated states would not play ball as the Conservatives ganged up to try to substantially increase the federal input.
There was no additional money on the table today, and I have to say what frustrates me is that of that $1 billion, only $350 million goes to actually providing services to people with disabilities. The rest is admin and set-up costs.
Today, in my judgment, was an opportunity squandered. We did not make the most of what could have been achieved today. And with due respect to the 3 trials that have been set up, they are small scale, they are in the small states.
It's not what the federal government or any of those promoting the scheme had in mind. Partisan politics ruled the day here, and it's the disabled and their families who may well pay the price. So tonight, they have this message for political leaders on all sides.
You have all agreed that this is a worthwhile and a doable scheme. Please just do it and stop talking about it.